Hey y'all, I'm James Wright and welcome back to Wood by Wright. Today we are doing a little bit of timber framing and having fun making this mailbox post. As you can see, I got to replace that thing. Now this may look huge, but it still has to go down into the ground 30 some inches, and I'm going to have a very large mailbox on here made out of copper. So today we're going to look at the timber framing on this and have a little bit of fun with it. So let's dive in. I want to make a mailbox post, a big mailbox post. These particular beams are 6" by 6" square, and I've been sitting on them for about 8 months. They were pulled out of a barn that was about 80 years old, so they are good old timbers. And I've been wanting to play with a few tools that I've gotten, such as this beam drill. If you've never seen a beam drill, they are a lot of fun. They are great for making mortises in large beams. They allow you to drill very large holes fairly accurately and squarely. Just set it up and run it down. The nice thing about this is that lead screw there will actually pull the bit through for you, as long as you keep the bit sharp. If it's not sharp, then you're going to be running into problems. But the nice thing is you can just crank it and it goes to town and does the work. And with having the two handles on there, the drill does the hard work of trying to keep the thing vertical, and all you are doing is powering it down, and that makes it fairly easy. Then there's a gear on the side you can flip and then retract and pull it out. So this is just one of those really fun tools that you don't get to play with that often, and anytime you get the chance to, it's well worth it. So it makes it fairly easy to pull it out here. I'm making a mortise that is 6 inches by 2 inches, if I remember correctly, by, well, 6 inches deep. It goes all the way through the beam. This is for the main cross member to go through. So we're drilling 3 holes from one side and then 3 holes from the other side. And the bit was a bit dull and it started skipping out on me, so I had to go back and sharpen it. If you want to see videos on that, I have videos on how to sharpen an auger bit. This particular one doesn't have the spurs on it. It has the spurs go up rather than down, so they clean on the backstroke rather than on the initial cut. Then once we cut the holes through, we can come back in and clean it out. If I had a smaller slick, I'd use it, but in this case I'm just using my 1.5" chisel to do most of the stock removal. And then in this case we can come in with my corner chisel, another timber framing tool that is a lot of fun. So this is 1" by 1" corner chisel, beautifully sharp and just so much fun to play with. Gives you that nice crisp clean corner all the way down. And then I do have to bring in my slick at some point because, well, I've got a slick, I've got to use it. This actually was really nice for smoothing out the surfaces and getting into it, but even for something like this particular one is a bit too big for that. So I need to do a bigger job just so I can use my bigger slick. Next, we need to then lay out the tenon. And the tenon on this will be, I believe it's 30 inches long, 2 inch wide. So it will go through the beam and stick out well beyond in the back. This will give me a place to hang a sign on the back of the beam. So we need to lay out the cheeks, the long cheeks for this, and then the shoulders. And first we can start by cutting down the shoulders of this long tenon. So slicing through with a cross-cut saw right down the line, down 2 inches so that we have a 2 inch wide tenon in the bottom. Flip it over and then do the same thing from the other side so we can cut in both of the shoulders. I'm trying to make it pretty close so that I don't have to come in and plane them off. Now it's time to do the cheeks, and basically this is resawing. We're cutting through 6 inches of material down almost 30 inches long. So it takes a little while. Thankfully this is a softwood, so this is a cedar rather than oak, as a lot of the old barn beams are oak. So this cuts a lot easier, and it also, well, it's easier to work with. But you can do the same thing with oak, and a lot of old timber framing is oak as well. So you can see how we're cutting all the way down along there to that point. Then once I have the cheeks cut, we can come in and clean up the shoulder and then plane the whole thing down smooth. I ended up leaving it a good bit large, so I had to scrub off a chunk of material in order to bring the cheeks down to where they needed to be. Scrub them down and then bring in the jack plane and flatten everything down, get it nice and smooth, and get it close to where I think it should be. Then we can go in for the test, and it ended up being a bit too fat. Slid in a little ways and then stopped. So we can slide it out and then adjust it. In this case I ended up adjusting the mortise rather than the tenon. Just a little easier because there's less material to work with on the mortise, as the tenon has a lot of material. And it's another good chance to bring in the corner chisel because that's just a really fun tool to play with. Once we get that adjusted, now we can start working on the tusk. This is a tusked tenon, which is basically a wedge that goes to the backside of the tenon that holds it in place. This is being made out of white oak. I wanted something a little bit sturdier because it will be fairly small. It's only 7/8 of an inch thick, and it's about 14 inches long. So we're just cutting an angle. I have no idea what this angle is. I just eyeballed it, drew a line, and cut an angle. I don't have any of the measurements on this. I just said I want it to be that long and have about that angle, and there we go. We can cut that down, plane it down, smooth it, make everything nice and shaped and smooth, because you want this to have a clean, smooth surface so that it slides rather than catching in the joint. And then we're also going to taper off the corners, mostly just for look, but on the bottom side it does make it a little bit easier to slide through the hole. A nice sharp chisel will make you very happy. Just love the open grain on that when it comes through with oak. You can see all those holes. It's beautiful. Add the block plane to chamfer it down just a little bit, makes it easier to slide through the wood, and finishes it off, makes everything pretty. So there is our wedge, and we can now put the cross member through the main beam. And well, first we have to create the mortise for the wedge to go into. I'm getting the cart before the horse. So I can set the wedge on there and then mark out its exact width. Then put the pins of the mortising gauge into the two marks that I just made. I just have a video that came out on making this mortising gauge if you want to see that. And then we can bore through this. And this is a 6-inch long hole, which makes it very easy to bore all the way through. One of them goes perfectly vertical, and one of them goes at an angle, because the mortise, well, it's angled due to match the wedge. And we can take out most of the material with the auger bits, and then we can come in and chisel it out. A lot of people are really worried about making sure these lines are perfect and matching up with the angle. It just sounds confusing, but honestly, if you draw a line on the side of the board, you can eyeball it and line the chisel up with it really easily and get a nice clean edge going all the way through. And now we can test it in, slide it into place, and then put our wedge through the tenon and lock it in and make sure that everything is square. In this case, I was actually really happy putting a square on it. The whole thing came right out, and I was flabbergasted. It's kind of cool when things work out. Except for right about there, I realized, oops, I put the wedge in upside down. Normally the wedge should slide from the top down, and in this case, it slid from the bottom up. So I'll have to fix that a little later. Yeah, that was a bit of a problem. You want it to come down. So I want to put a cross member underneath to support the horizontal member. So I set that on there and then drew lines where it intersected. It's about 45 degrees. I didn't check it to make sure. I just eyeballed it and drew lines on there, because the lines are the important thing. Whatever angle those come out to is the angle we need to work at. And the beam was longer than it needed to be, and there was chunks on either end I wanted to cut off. So we ended up cutting off both ends of the beam just past the 45-degree angles. And we are left with a beam to work with. Now we're going to create a tenon on either end of this, an angled tenon that then will fit into the main beam and the main horizontal. And so to do that, we're going to mark it out 2 inches wide in the middle. So actually it ended up being, I think, like a 2.5 inch wide, leaving you like 1.25 inches on either side, something weird like that. I didn't really care what it is because I wasn't matching to a particular chisel. I just cut it out. And then we can cut down the cheeks and then cut the shoulders, and we will have an angled tenon. And the angled tenon really sounds confusing, but if you just cut at an angle on the shoulder, then you can turn the board around and cut down the cheek, and it's the exact same thing. It just happens to have the board at an angle. And voila, there you go. Just need to clean this one up so I could bring in the shoulder plane and smooth it out. I wanted to make sure that that edge was nice and flat so it sat nicely against the rest of the beam. And do the same thing on the other side, cut off the other cheek, and we now have a tenon. And then I can flip it around and do the same thing on the other end of the board as well. Now we need to make the mortise for this to fit into. And it's basically just a triangle wedge that it slides down into. And so originally I was just going to chop it out and mortise it out with a chisel, but I thought, no, let's bore this out. It may end up taking a little bit more time. It may be a little bit easier, maybe a little slower. Some people can argue one way or the other. What I ended up doing is drilling 2 holes in the middle, all the way down to the depth, and then I drilled 2 holes at either corner, or 1 hole at each corner, going at 45 degrees back into the wood, or whatever the line I drew was. Because remember, I drew all those lines on the other side when I had the board down, so I'm just eyeballing to what that line is. So we can come in at that angle, and then we can chop out everything in between those holes. And this actually goes really quickly. I don't know if it was faster boring or chopping, but I ended up chopping with the boring, and it was less boring that way. A lot of paring, a lot of cleaning out, and these actually took a little bit longer than I expected because they were almost 7 inches deep. No, they're only 6 inch wide, so it would be like 5.5 inches deep. but chopping all the way down at an angle to that depth actually took quite a bit of time. Once the angle was down, then we could fit the beam in there, test it, and make sure that everything was good. It took a decent amount of work going back and forth to fit it into place, but once we did, I was very happy. Now we need to go back to that wedge and flip it around so that it pounds in from the top. I thought about making a larger wedge so that it would slide all the way down, but then I thought, no, I'm just going to cut the hole in half, and it's only going to be in contact with half of the beam. But since the beam is 6 inches wide, that's far more strength than it needs. So we're only going to flip the wedge around and put it back in from the other side. So again, all I had to do was widen out the hole with the proper angle so that the wedge will then pound in from this side rather than from the other side. Of course, I guess at this point now I could drive in the wedge from either side if I wanted to, but it's better to have it coming from the top. Now let's do some decorative edging on this. I just wanted to put some chamfers on the end of the post as it comes through just to make it look a little bit cleaner. So I just drew an eyeball of a 45 on either side and then cut to the line. And then we needed to put a chamfer on the nose of the main beam that would go underneath the mailbox. And so we did basically the same thing on that side, drew a line, and then cut a chunk off. You can see how this used to actually be the connection joint somewhere in the barn. And so there's an old post hole, and I just kind of liked that eye there and thought I'd leave it. Originally I was thinking I might turn that into something, carve a dragon's head around the eye or something of that nature, but I thought, no, let's just leave it at that. Then we need to cut it to length, and this is a fun time to bring out the large crosscut saw. And this thing cuts like butter, and actually cuts wood like butter, like a hot knife through butter, whatever those saying is. And it actually leaves a relatively clean cut, not to mention being really fast and really fun. So you can see how this all comes together, and yeah. Now we need to take it out to the garage and actually work on this whole thing and bring it together. We're not done with it yet, but we're just going to do the detail work of bringing it together so that we can get ready to do the final touches on it next week. So we can pound this all together, get it all in place. I'm not pinning any of the tenons yet. I will pin them later once we get everything exactly where I want it. And we need to add some finish to this. For that, I'm going to be using some Total Boat penetrating epoxy, letting that set in, and then putting some Thompson water seal on top of all that and calling it good. And there it is. Mailbox post.
So that is it. I'm really happy with this. And the next thing we're going to be doing is putting the mailbox on. You're going to be doing a bunch more detail. We're going to be hanging the sign on there and then putting it in the ground and getting it finished in the next video. So this has been a lot of fun. It was something I've been waiting on for a long time. I've had these timbers for 8 months or so now, and been wanting to do this for a while and replacing that. So if you like the timber framing, you'd like to see more like that, please let me know down below. I would like to do a timber framing build sometime and actually build a building. I have a few ideas for that, but we'll see how that goes in the future. If you did like the video, please like, comment, subscribe, and share. Specifically, that really does help out the channel. I think that's about it for today. And until next time, have a wonderful day. I wanna wish you a Merry Christmas. I wanna wish you a Merry